for this quarter's Uncommon Perception, we decided we would try something a little bit different, which is to expose you or take you inside to the idea generation process here at Tocqueville and how that idea generation is expressed through different investments. I'm joined today by my colleague and portfolio manager, Peter Shawn. Hi, Peter. How are you?
Hi, Paul.
As well as Neil Keegan of Marlinspike will be joining us in just a couple of moments. Hi, Neil. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Before we begin, we'll pause here for our obligatory compliance disclosure. With that out of the way, Peter, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about how we developed our thesis on the defense technology space.
Sure. So we followed the defense and aerospace sector for a long time. And typically, we've looked for opportunities to invest, usually in the prime contractors like RTX, when we think there's something particularly compelling from a contrarian investment thesis standpoint, and we think that the valuation fits with our discipline. Examples of that would be when one of the contractors is having a problem with a large platform, particular product type. When the government decides that they are, scrutinizing the defense budget, or, for example, even during COVID, when all of commercial aerospace shut down, and a lot of these companies have commercial aviation segments, so they were all under pressure, and the stocks were depressed as a result.
So maybe then we could talk a little bit about what changed, what altered our thinking around the time of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and with Israel finding itself under various attacks from Hamas and others.
Sure. So I think, what sort of came to us as sort of a variant perception about the industry is that over time, it became clear to us that the problems that the industry had were a bit of a function of the industry structure and the consolidation that took place in the industry. And I know Neil's going to speak about that in a minute. But what happened during Ukraine and also in the Middle East is that we observed that the traditional prime contractors were not necessarily the ones that were benefiting from sort of new defense planning and new spending, and the stocks didn't perform as you might have expected. We observed that the nature of warfare had changed. Obviously, a lot of talk about drones, but also increasing importance of space, not just as a field of operation, but as means of communications and intelligence gathering. And that led us to focus on companies that had exposure to that as an end market.
Right, and that's all exacerbated by the fact that we have a very, very high debt payment due each year that is now exceeding, at least at current interest rates, the entire military defense budget. So it sort of forced us to look further afield because it's forced the government to look further afield, and that's who's winning, I guess. So that leads us to what are the names that we sort of found ourselves, or maybe not names just, but investment opportunities. How do we express this idea?
Sure.
in investment?
So in the public arena, a couple of things were going on. The DoD was changing the way it procured its necessities, was looking for alternative contract fulfillment, different ways of procuring its products without necessarily having to go through the prime contractor and then the subcontractor and all of the bureaucracy that goes with all of that. So there were a lot of new types of companies coming to the forefront and trying to serve these varied demands of the Defense Department. So some of that was focused on some of the new technologies like artificial intelligence and autonomous vehicles. So examples of that are Palantir, which is a name that we were relatively early to being focused on, and they're clearly a leader in artificial intelligence for defense applications, but with a very large and untapped commercial market opportunity. Another good example would be AeroVironment, which is one of the leading providers of drones and sort of integration drone technology with other systems, and both to support the drones and also to defend against the drones, particularly in light of their acquisition of Blue Halo. Another good example of that was sort of in the space arena is Rocket Labs. Everybody knows about SpaceX, but Rocket Labs is sort of a fast follower and a leading provider of launch services and satellite communications. So those are some examples in the public markets.
Right. Great. Well, so then maybe we could talk a little bit about how you ran into Neil and how that led to us looking, maybe further afield than we might otherwise.
Sure. So, as you know, we have spent a fair amount of time looking at the opportunity zone space, and we observed in that marketplace that there was a fair amount of overlap between the defense industrial base and opportunity zones. I think opportunity zones is probably a subject we could have for another one of these, another one of these video calls. But a lot of the sort of contacts that we made there in the venture capital community helped us find some private market opportunities that also fit with this thesis. One of which was Marlinspike, and when we had the opportunity to meet Neil, we thought that their strategy made a lot of sense for the thesis that we had developed around sort of these emerging technologies and changes in procurement and dual use applications. We were able to find some other interesting private investments outside of Marlinspike. Some of those fit with some of the themes that we've been pursuing. So in the satellite arena, like we invested in Rocket Labs, we invested in a private entity called Loft Orbital. We came across another private aerospace company called Radia, which is providing transport aircraft. And those are some of the sort of other non-public opportunities that we came to find in this thesis.
So maybe what I'll do now is I'll let you introduce Neil, and then maybe you and Neil can talk a little bit about some of the things that we've been collaborating with him on and his background, et cetera. So
sure. So it would be impossible for me to completely describe Neil and his team's impressive background, but suffice to say, Neil, has a deep background in the military, having served many years in the Navy. We thank him for his service. But Neil, I'll let you introduce the rest of your team, because I certainly couldn't get everybody.
Great. Well, thanks, Peter. I really appreciate that. It was an honor to serve. As you mentioned, my quick background: Naval Academy graduate, active duty Navy, Goldman Sachs, ran a family office, and but always wanted to run my own company, do my own thing, but wanted to do it with like-minded partners. Had the good fortune of meeting Mislav Chalusik and Chip Walter when I had started Marlinspike Capital, just doing direct deals like Palantir and Shield AI. Mislav has a deep expertise in aerospace engineering and a very deep background investing in this space. So I thought he'd be an ideal partner to be on the investment committee and to be our CIO. Chip Walter brings a wealth of experience: 28 years Navy, 8 years CIA, 3 years running venture for Northrop Grumman. He's an absolute key member of our team and is a widely respected expert in our space. Tim Busby, we wanted a professional CFO. He fits the bill, keeps the trains running on time, does a great job for us. Nick Snode, he's our West Point grad, 8 years active duty in the Army. And then we had the opportunity to bring him over when we launched Fund One. Grace, she's the newest addition to our team. We're continuing to grow with A-plus talent. She was at an $8 billion credit shop in New York. We brought her over to help with our firm communications and to make sure that we're giving our limited partners the best information and the most timely information to keep them well informed with how we're coming along and how our companies are coming along.
Very helpful, Neil.
That's great, Neil. Maybe, Neil, a good starting point would be to sort of set the stage for us historically as sort of what's happened to the defense industry over the past few decades. What's worked, what hasn't worked, and how have we gotten to the point where it's sort of a sense of urgency has developed to reinvigorate the defense industrial base to meet the sort of growing threat environment around the world.
Sure. I love this question, for many reasons. Number one, I'm a history buff. So I was a history major at Navy, and it almost corresponds with not only my career, but Chip's career in the military. So I was actually a plebe, which means a first year at the Naval Academy in 1990. So I was studying Russian, Soviet style ships, tanks, missile systems, aircraft. You had to understand their silhouettes. So if you were ever out at sea, you would understand what you're hopefully, going to be shooting at or that you might be taking rounds from. So this was summer of 1990. Fast forward 6 months later, we've got the first Gulf War, right? So almost throw that whole thing out. And now we're fighting a war in the desert with 20, 30 years of the U.S. military buildup with precision munitions. And that was like a shot heard around the world. When we lit off in the first, Gulf War, the whole world was watching. And here's where things started to get interesting. The Soviet Union fell shortly thereafter, December of 91. So they basically, went away. China was really starting to grow, but they were trying to assess where we were militarily and economically. And so we had this effectively we had a peace dividend starting in the early 90s. And this is when the current Secretary of Defense, Les Aspin, and his deputy William Perry got together with the big heads of what we call the prime contractors. And you mentioned some of these earlier in your remarks, Peter. But in 1993, we went from 51 large prime contractors, and these are the contractors that are building ships, aircraft carriers, missile systems. These are the exquisite programs that our military runs off of. And they basically said, "Hey guys, parties coming to an end here. You need to consolidate because we're going to be cutting budgets, and we don't need all of this stuff anymore. So you need to figure that out." And so they did. They took the signal, and this is how you end up with, five or six very large primes that have combined somewhat north of a $500 billion market cap. And look, they do great work. They do exquisite work, but they're public companies. It's quarter to quarter. They pay dividends. They want to build very large, exquisite, platforms and programs, and that's where they're focused. So what's happened over time is that's opened up a huge opportunity set for the private market to step in, really starting with SpaceX and Palantir. And they seem like either all over the place because they are. I mean, these companies were founded over 20 years ago, and they really opened up the aperture and created new pathways for new business models. And that's why you've had companies like Anduril and Shield AI and OpenAI. All these other companies have been following, in the Navy, we would say, following the wake of the guide. So you've got one main ship that's plowing through, everybody else get in line and follow through. So that's what we're really seeing. It's this massive opportunity set across these new innovators that are really starting to not only play a big part, but be real leaders. Like you mentioned, Palantir, market cap's over $300 billion. It's unbelievable. I mean, these guys have just absolutely executed, not only in defense, but also the commercial side. So that was a good pick.
Thanks. So, I mean, what is it about the geopolitical environment today that makes investing in defense-related technology so, compelling? Is it the threat environment? Is it the fact that we have to fix the procurement process? Is it, the challenges faced by the prime contractors? And then maybe related to that, what are, some of the areas that you think across defense technology generally are most interesting? Is it the drones? Is it AI? Is it robotics? I mean, where should we be thinking?
So was that 10 or 12 questions in one question?
Well, I mean, it's a combination of, three questions, maybe.
Okay, they're great. And if I miss any of them, please get me back on track. I think to start off, while the defense tech world is certainly very hot, I think there's been a real recognition that this is happening right before our eyes. I mean, you mentioned early at the top of the call that the nature of warfare is changing. We're seeing it every day with Russia and Ukraine. We're seeing it with the Houthis, with Iranian drones, with the horrible events that happened in Israel on October 7th. So it's changing right in front of us. So you can't ignore it. And there's more and more capital, and there's more recognition that money is flowing into this space, and there are winners that are breaking out. So I think that's number one. But number two, I'd say that in general, having an allocation to defense just makes sense, whether it's a combination of public assets, private equity, things like your opportunity zone investment tied to real estate, credit, venture. There's a whole landscape, and they all have a role to play. And I think there's a lot to do here. We talked a little bit about the defense budget. So about $1 trillion, 848 was in the regular budget, about another 150 billion added with the one big beautiful bill. And I think what's interesting about that is not only is the number huge, I mean, $1 trillion, And that's also on an annual basis. So you got to remember just how big this space is and how like clockwork. I mean, at least the National Defense Authorization Act going back to the 60s. I mean, this thing passes every year. I mean, it gets a little bit tricky, but it generally passes with bipartisan support. And generally speaking, it's going up. We're also seeing our counterparts in Europe doubling, in some cases tripling their defense budgets. So that's also a recognition. Again, more capital, more flows, and we're seeing more flows into areas that we need to fill some major gaps where we've either taken our eye off the ball and our adversaries haven't, or we need to continue to push more capital into things like AI, which is ultimately going to speed up our kill chain or decision making processes, which will probably be the thing that sways the win on one side or the other if we end up in a major conflict or multiple major conflicts.
As you think about allocating capital, I mean, certainly within your strategy, but I guess it carries over into the public markets. How important is the dual use aspect of these companies? What are you looking for in terms of the size of an addressable market? Do you have to have equivalent size of markets on both sides of the equation for these things to work? How do you think about those things?
So, there's the big reason that we're in dual use is we want to have, yet another hedge. So if we were only defense, there are some defense companies that's probably all there ever be. So like a hypersonic missile company, they're making hypersonic missiles and that's what they're doing. We don't see that as a massive total addressable market because there's not really that many commercial use cases for a hypersonic missile. So you're likely to see, all of our investments, either they start in defense or they start in commercial, but have the ability to kind of go to the other direction. And that's really one of the big things that where we add value is as we, sit all six of us right in the DC area and with our background and experience, we know where the needs are. And in some cases, the company might have really interesting capabilities on the commercial side, but they haven't really thought about the military side. Like I'll give you an example. One of our Fund One companies is called Armada AI. They've created an edge compute platform. They initially started with a 40-foot Connex box that you can put out on a dam in Brazil or offshore oil rig somewhere. They were really focused on the commercial side. And we said, have you thought about the US Navy? Like, oh, that's interesting. Tell us more about that. I'm like, well, if you think about a potential conflict in Taiwan, we're going to need to have our carrier battle groups, our amphibious readiness groups, all of our naval assets, hopefully out of range, but still close to the fight. But can you imagine a scenario where we've got, tens of thousands of drones operating surface of the sea, subsurface, aerial? You're going to need a lot of compute power and a lot of speed or latency out at the edge to be able to control all these assets. Like, wow, that's really fascinating. So next thing you know, we've introduced them to the Navy's Fourth Fleet. They're working on a pilot program to then either build these data centers inside of Navy holds, or if the ship's big enough to just put them right on the ship and make them in a bespoke manner, for the Navy.
That's fascinating, and you mentioned this being one of the portfolio companies in Fund One. Maybe you give us some of the highlights that you had both in the first fund and in the second fund now that we're associated with.
Sure, great, thanks. Yeah, I would mention Armada. That's a Fund One company. Androl is a company that I think a lot of folks are following on the private side now. So we invested in 2022 in the Series E at a 7 billion pre-money, 8.5 billion post-money. They just recently raised their Series G at a 30.5 billion post-money. They're taking $1 billion of proceeds and they're building a factory in Ohio called Arsenal One. So doing some really, really neat things. I think as of now, they've got 17 programs of record. So this is a company that is following the wake of the guide with SpaceX and Palantir. They have got, I think, over 17 programs of record right now. So we see them as really, really executing. So we think this is going to be a big driver of returns for Fund One, in addition to Armada. The third one, and you also mentioned space and communications, Voyager Technologies is a company that we invested in. Actually, it's about 6 years ago. It was one of our first early investments before we even launched the fund. And then it was our first investment in Fund One, March of 22. So a little less than 4 years ago. They went public in June. They've done well so far, and we're going to distribute this stock to our Fund One LPs in December when the lockup's over. So that's another thing that you get with us, like we did with Palantir, is that as soon as a company goes public, and they're not all going to go public, but if and when they do, we want to get the stock back to the limited partners and to their advisors like you, so you can then give them a holistic set of advice around a particular name and how that fits in with their portfolio.
Well, thanks very much, Neil. We're required to make a disclosure that the firm and its principals are investors in Marlinspike. And this is obviously a topic that we could spend much more time delving into. And if you'd like to do that, and if you'd like to speak to Peter or myself directly, or Marlinspike and Neil specifically, we'd be delighted to speak to you. My contact information, or our contact information, I should say, will be at the end of this presentation. Thanks so much for joining us.
No, thank you, Paul. We really appreciate your friendship and your investment, and we're excited to be on this journey with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil.